conditions conducive to the elimination of discrimination and the creation of effective equality of opportunity and treatment for women and men workers. As a result, many women continue to be involved in jobs marked by gender-based norms and discrimination, informal arrangements, and poor working conditions and levels of remuneration. In small-scale aquaculture, they often lack technical skills, access to land, inputs, and infrastructure, and control over profits, and mostly contribute as invisible family labor. Although many major aquaculture producing countries made significant strides in eradicating child labor, challenges persist. Child labor is particularly prevalent in small-scale and family-owned enterprises and on processing sites, especially informal ones. Despite governments' efforts to address the issue of forced labor and human trafficking in their seafood industries, exploitative labor practices and poor working conditions tantamount to forced labor have been reported in a number of aquaculture producing countries. They often occur in informal activities, for example, on shrimp pre-processing sites or in fry collection. In addition to fundamental ILO conventions, the right of workers in agriculture and the rural economy to establish free and independent organizations is further affirmed in other ILO instruments, such as, for example, the Rural Workers Organization Convention number 141. However, in view of legislative and implementation gaps in many countries, workers face barriers in exercising their right to organize and bargain collectively. In particular, migrant, informal, temporary, seasonal, and subcontracted workers are often unable to form or join a union. Low literacy and education levels, as well as poverty, informality, and poor working and living conditions often exacerbate the barriers to access to rights. The last section of the report analyzes the impact of the megatrends on the sector. So for example, with regard to the population growth, the report underscores the important impact that the expansion of the sector has had on poverty reduction and food security, highlighting direct and indirect poverty linkages with benefits stemming from improved food supply and increased incomes and employment. Seafood is one of the most highly traded commodities in the world. The globalization of the aquaculture sector, which was spurred by inter alia trade liberalization, a sharp increase in the international demand for seafood products and advancements in production and logistic technology have created important opportunities for many emerging and developing economies. New technological solutions offer promising prospects to address concrete challenges within the sector and could potentially contribute to sustainable enterprise development and new employment opportunities while improving productivity and environmental outcomes. Policy responses will therefore be needed to address potential negative impacts on technological advancements on jobs. With regard to the impact of aquaculture on environment, the report notes that the farmed fish offer an alternative animal protein source that is more efficient than the cultivation of land animals, while also referring to the negative impacts. It highlights that improving environmental sustainability of the sector, including by investing into skills, productivity improvements, and decent jobs, will be key to the sector's long-term economic sustainability. The report also has a small section on the impact of COVID, and it highlights that the pandemic has affected the sector from both business and workers' side. The crisis has once again exposed also the frailty of the food system, highlighting the employment and labor challenges facing the agri-food sector, including aquaculture, and the importance of placing the promotion of decent work and at the center of recovery strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Butele, for this introduction to a very comprehensive report that is available to all those attending the meeting and the general public if they so choose. We will now start the general discussion. I first turn to the social partners, as is usual, to make their general statements. The officers meeting earlier this morning agreed to a time limit of 7 minutes for the groups, and then 2 minutes for interventions by individual participants. After the groups, I will pass the floor to the governments. This will be followed by the official international organizations and finally the non-governmental international organizations that have requested to make an intervention. If you have a prepared speech, I would like you to send it to the email address shown on the screen, hopefully now. Or it's in the chat box, sorry. Yeah. And that would assist the work of the interpreters which are working with us and also for the report writers. I kindly remind speakers when taking the floors to identify themselves. And as I have rolled some dice in my hand, deciding on which of the social partners should start, it comes up with the employers and Mr. Munte. Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Munte, I give you the floors for your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. And first of all, let me congratulate you, Chair, for your appointment, as well as my fellow vice chairs from the government and from the workers. I think it's close to unique that 3 of the 4 vice chairs come from the Nordic countries, but hopefully that will enable to make the conditions for reaching an agreement good. I'm confident that we'll all work together in a constructive spirit during the week ahead of us and manage to have a good and consensual outcome. On behalf of the employers group, we value very much the opportunity to have this tripartite exchange to discuss the future work in the aquaculture sector. And we're particularly keen to have this exchange because aquaculture plays an important role in supporting livelihoods, employment, and local economic development, particularly for coastal communities. While the sector is perhaps not the most widely known by the general public, it has constantly grown over the last years to the point that it now accounts for half of the world's fish food supply, as was pointed out in the last presentation of the report. As the world population continues to grow and natural resources coming from oceans are limited, the sector sits at the crossroad to achieve Sustainable Development Goal number 2, SDG 2, on ending hunger and ensuring food security. Aquaculture will also play an increasingly important role in meeting the global demand for fisheries and other products. And this growing importance of the sector also translates in terms of employment. The latest figures show that more than 20 million people are directly employed in aquaculture facilities, with Asia accounting for the vast majority, with 19.6 million persons working in that region. However, the pandemic, as we have heard, has reminded us that we must not take this fast-paced growth as granted. Like almost all other industries, the COVID-19 pandemic resulted in significant negative impacts on aquaculture, with many businesses, in particular SMEs, negatively affected in terms of business continuity, thus threatening the livelihood and income of many. More concretely, the disruption of production processes, mobility restrictions, and the decrease of net income have all been strong immediate impacts. In that regard, our group will consider the recent ILO COVID-19 global call to action as the framework to shape our discussion on the recovery. The call identifies agreed priorities for an employment-rich recovery, and our task will be to identify those salient points to implement the call of this specific sector. Without anticipating our discussion under point number 1, one of the main lessons we have learned from the pandemic is that there's the vital role of the private sector, the vital role the private sector plays to ensure food security, and thus all government must have national policies that encourage a vibrant sector. With seafood dependence at an all-time high and wild catch fish stocks under stress, we see a prime opportunity for ILO tripartite constituents to work collaboratively to ensure the sector remains on the right track. At the same time, employers think that we should not focus our discussion on short term solely, but also expand on those longer term impacts which are influence the sector's entire ecosystem, such as this disruption of value chain, skills and workers shortages, informality, or the need to implement digital tools to increase productivity levels. It's important that we take stock of the current state of industry to ensure it can continue to be the fastest growing agri-food sector globally. For employers, this meeting should therefore analyze in particular the current constraints and opportunities for private sector involvement in aquaculture value chain and identify opportunities for enterprise development and job creation across the aquaculture value chain. Our discussion can demonstrate not only the value of aquaculture, but also ensure that aquaculture farms operate in a business environment which allows them to seize full advantage of the processes and technologies in order to meet current environmental standards and sustainability goals at the same time. We will, of course, come back to the discussion points later this week, today and tomorrow, but I'll mention that we have 3 points we think are of utmost importance from the employer side, and we'll come back to that in detail. That is informality, productivity, and skills. As I said, we'll come back to that in details later. Turning to a more practical note, employers are fully committed to make the most out of this hybrid meeting, despite the inherent difficulties this format entails. I take this opportunity to thank all those members of the employers group who have been able to travel to Geneva, as well as to recognize the great effort of those who are connecting remotely, which will have to endure in practical working hours. It is therefore our responsibility as tripartite constituents to achieve consensus in a manner that allows participants from all regions of the world to engage in our discussions. And one way to do that is to respect as much as possible the agreed working hours and to have conclusions which are concise, precise, and above all reflect the point of consensus identified during the first aspects of the discussion. Then these elements should not be included in the text. Ultimately, having focused and the conclusions will support the efforts to provide action-oriented guidance that are implementable at national level. Having said that, employers would like to reiterate their strong commitment to engage in this important discussion and demonstrate that social dialogue, even though with hybrid means, remains the best tool we've had at our disposal to overcome the challenges, but also take advantage of the opportunities. As employers, we are optimistic, certainly in the long term, about this sector and the people in it, and we look forward to our discussions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Montaigne. I now give the floor to Mr. Bragason on the workers group, the workers group's vice chairperson. Mr. Bragason, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And like Henrik Munter said earlier, I would like to congratulate you and congratulate the other vice chairs that have been designated as kind of leading this dialogue here today. First of all, on behalf of the workers group, I would like to express our gratitude to the ILO for hosting this tripartite meeting and congratulate the office with the effective preparatory work and production of a comprehensive report, which sets out a good basis for the discussions that we're going to have in the next 5 days. It is of high importance that the International Labour Organizations continues its operation in such a complex circumstances, continuing to develop the instruments and promote labor standards in the time of pandemic of the COVID-19. We know that these instruments are important bricks in the fundament of the human rights, economic stability, and social security, which are all under serious attack during the corona pandemic. We would like to thank all of the delegates and the participants of this meeting, representatives of employers, governments, which are here present today in the building. The pandemic did not allow the workers group to build a full delegation because of safety concerns and travel restrictions, but we are very much grateful to everyone that have shown up here in person, but also all of you that are following us online and will be contributing through a virtual means during this next few days. As the employers mentioned, it is a complicated format, but we are all committed to achieve the best possible results and outcome. It was not easy to set up this meeting, but we are all here physically and online today because we believe the topic of the meeting is of high importance to the millions of workers employed and self-employed in the most dynamically growing part of the global agri-food system. Aquaculture is one of the world's fastest growing agri-food industries and provides an alternative to traditional fisheries. If managed well, it can provide important source of protein, economic development, and employment in rural economies. However, as clearly demonstrated in the background report, the aquaculture sector must overcome its labor and employment challenges to fully harness its potential and ensure sustainability throughout the value chain. In the world, where about 690 million people globally are undernourished, without aquaculture, the food system would simply collapse, and billions would experience hunger and starvation, especially in those regions where fish is the key component of the daily meal. Given the strain of the COVID-19 on the food supply chain, it was necessary for many governments to declare fishery and aquaculture as crucial sectors. Workers' contribution and continued services were greatly appreciated by the public. But as many key workers say today, things is not enough. We want a serious reorganization of the society which applauds key workers in form of social protection, decent income, and good working conditions. Globally, direct employment in agriculture is growing, but estimating real global employment is very complex due to its fragmented and complex value chain, with high level of informality, seasonality, and subcontracting. Jobs in the sector range from production and sales of inputs to farming and harvesting, processing services, marketing and distribution of fish and seafood. Aquaculture operation can be informal and small scale, as well as highly organized and industrial in nature. Dear Chair and dear delegates, the ILO governing body at its 337th session, defining the priorities for the work program for the 2020 to 2021, decided that at the global level, the ILO will undertake policy-oriented research on the links between decent jobs creation, rural development, and structural transformation in the strategic rural sectors such as agriculture, thereby recognizing the strategic role of agriculture in the rural development. This decision is echoed by many countries at all continents, developing national and regional programs to support development in the sector. The ILO report defines aquaculture as a purposeful or controlled cultivation and subsequent harvesting of freshwater, brackish water, and saltwater aquatic organisms, including fish, crustaceans, mollusks, algae, and the aquatic plants. Indeed, aquaculture is becoming an increasingly important part of the rural economy that also includes work in pre-harvest and post-harvest activities. Work in the sector is normally hard and dangerous, but it is also frequently underpaid and undervalued. Many fish farm workers struggle to make a decent living, and their communities are often isolated in rural areas with little access to social infrastructure and protection. Furthermore, most small-scale aquaculture producers are poor and depend on unpaid family labor, including that of women and children. They face numerous obstacles in raising their income levels, including financial indebtedness, limited access to public services, credit, knowledge, and inputs. Furthermore, the aquaculture sector is characterized by a high prevalence of informal and precarious work arrangements, such as underemployment, disguised employment, seasonal employment, and other casual form of work. Migrant labor in various forms is essential for the sector, in particular in transnational companies, supply chains. The use of forced labor has also been identified as a serious problem in many countries. Whether employed in small-scale or larger commercial operations, all aquaculture workers are particularly prone to different forms of occupational hazards. Protection of labor rights is weak, and even when regulation exists, enforcement and compliance is poor. Truth is, but labor inspectorates are often weak, underfinanced, and even non-existent in many countries. Furthermore, the nature of the industry makes it difficult for labor inspections to do their full job. Aquaculture is not a new sector, but only recently has it grown to a visible size, and it will continue to grow as the demand for fish and seafood is increasing. The working condition and human rights issues in the sector, however, up to now, have not been seriously studied. There are serious gaps in the data systems. Normally, aquaculture gets lost in the general agriculture or general fishery statistics. Without properly collected and gender-segregated data, it is hard to analyze the trends in the employment, estimate the occupational health and safety situation, the number and the causes of accidents and occupational diseases, which we know are widespread. Aquaculture is part of agriculture, but in the times when the international label standards were developed for agriculture, the sectors were underdeveloped to bring enough attention to its specifics. And today, we see a serious gap in the coverage, which is increasing with the growing employment in the sector. The governments and employers are trying to cover this gap by developing own approaches, which creates a mixture of models in the regulations of social and environmental aspects of the agriculture development. These models need to be studied to identify the best practices and look for solutions in addressing the decent work gaps. This is fundamental if we want to ensure that development of aquaculture translate into enhancements of livelihoods, income, and social protections in rural economies, and for all workers in the value chain. According to the workers group, this should be the task of this meeting during this next 5 days. However, we need to be realistic. The scope of the sector and the variety of the issues will probably not allow us to resolve all the existing problems we have. Still, the meeting should represent an opportunity for the exchange of experiences and approaches and become the first step on the path of defining what socially sustainable agriculture should mean and how to ensure in practice how workers in the sector are covered by existing international labor standards, especially in relations to occupational safety and health, elimination of child labor, elimination of forced labor, ensuring gender equality, ensure non-discrimination, ensure freedom of association and collective bargaining. Dear Mr. Chair, the background report and the 3 points for discussion provide clear frame for the constructive dialogue on the future of work in aquaculture. The workers group is keen to contribute to this dialogue, and we believe the conclusion of the meeting will allow us all to move in the direction of making aquaculture truly socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable source of fish and seafood for the planet. We look forward to a good dialogue with employers and the governments in the next few days. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Bragason. Now that we have had the opportunity to hear from the social partners, I would like to turn to the governments now to make a general statement, starting, of course, with the Vice Chairperson of the Government Group, Mr. Akkar. The Vice Chairperson of the Government Group may be followed by any other government representative who wishes to make a brief opening statement. Please raise your hand in the toolbar function or comment in the chat box if you want to take the floor. The Government Group Vice Chairperson, Mr. Akkar, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. Mr. Northdahl, the Government Group congratulates you on your appointment as Chairperson of the meeting. We also congratulate Mr. Munte and Mr. Bragason for their appointment as spokespersons for the social partners. We look forward to working with you during this week. The Government Group welcomes this opportunity to contribute to an informed and balanced discussion on the future of work in aquaculture in the context of the rural economy, and would like to thank the office for organizing such an important meeting under these circumstances and for its reports. The governments, there are a few topics as important as the agri-food sector. In many countries, the agri-food sector, which includes aquaculture, makes a significant contribution to employment, especially in rural and coastal areas, and constitutes an important source of export earnings. It also has critical dependencies with many other sectors of the economy, in particular, energy, tourism, manufacturing, and transport. More importantly, the agri-food sector is our lifeline. Today, approximately 800 million people globally are experiencing chronic hunger. Many more suffer from malnutrition. As we know, poor nutrition affects negatively not only health, but also human capital, productivity, and growth. Child malnutrition causes stunting, which leads to poor physical growth, and this in turn affects the future labor force negatively. It is estimated that poor diet of workers may cost countries up to 20% in productivity. This challenge has been exacerbated by the pandemic, and this raises concerns about its longer-term impact on food and nutrition security, health, and jobs. The UN Food Systems Summit held in September this year underscored the criticality of transforming food systems for a better world. Many member states, including my own country, Turkey, expressed the importance of promoting decent work towards transforming the food systems. As our President, His Excellency Recep Tayyip Erdogan, noted in his address to the summit, Turkey's national roadmap covers an array of issues around the agri-food sector, including sustainability in agriculture, livestock, and fishery sectors, to ensuring food security in the face of emergencies and crises. And in this context, we continue to work on issues such as women's and youth employment in agricultural and food sectors, as well as creating decent work opportunities. Aquaculture is fast emerging as a promising subsector which could sustainably address the problem of food and nutrition security for the steadily increasing global population. Tapping into the sector's potential could alleviate the pressure on capture fisheries and land-based meat production to meet the growing demand for animal protein. Sustainable and inclusive growth in the aquaculture industry could further be beneficial in terms of increasing income and livelihoods for many rural communities, both coastal and inland. And in this process, also contribute to government's efforts in alleviating rural poverty. We very much look forward to the discussion of this meeting and are also eager to learn from the constituents of various countries how they are dealing with addressing the employment and labor challenges facing the sector, which is critical to tapping the sector's potential to advance sustainable development, inclusive growth, and decent work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Akar, and thank you very much for sticking precisely to the time limits we discussed earlier, and even if before we made them a little bit longer, which the social partners did not respect, even if we had allocated them 7 minutes. So let's keep in mind, let's keep the time records as close to the time negotiated as possible. And following Mr. Akar, let's do as well as he did. Are there any other governments that have wished to take the floor? I know that the government of India has requested the floor, but those which would like to take the floor would indicate so by raising their virtual hand or by putting their names in the chat box. But I give the floor to the representative of the government of India. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the opportunity. Respected Chair and Vice Chairs, aquaculture is a growing sector world over, which now accounts for half of the world's fish food supply. It provides direct employment to more than 20 million people the world over. It has got a lot of potential to provide employment opportunities and also address the challenges of food and nutritional security. As far as India is concerned, it supports 4.28 million people in aquaculture, and it is expected to provide more employment in the future. Though this sector has a lot of potential for providing employment, it is often characterized as informal with underemployment and casual and seasonal work. The sector is also marred by various decent work deficits, such as informality, discrimination, presence of child labor and forced labor, lack of organizational capacity of the workers, low social dialogue, insecure wages, low-level skills, low-level or negligible social protection, and occupational safety and health concerns. For promoting decent employment creation, India has taken a number of significant steps. India has recently enacted 4 labor codes on social security, on occupational safety and health, on industrial relations, and on wage, subsuming and rationalizing most of the labor laws. In the Social Security Code, provision has been made to notify schemes for the unorganized or informal sector workers, gig workers, and platform workers. Government has been mandated to set up Social Security Fund for the unorganized and informal sector workers. Government has recently launched an Aadhaar-linked e-Shram portal, and government is registering all 380 million unorganized sector workers with their skill sets on this portal for giving them social security benefits. This is a path-breaking reform which the government has undertaken. Government has enacted Code on Occupational Safety and Health in order to address OSH concerns and regulate the working condition of the persons employed in establishment. Under the Code on Wages, the central government is mandated to fix a floor wage, taking into account living standards of the workers, and minimum wage decided by the central and state government has to be higher than this floor wage. The code prohibits the employer to pay wages less than minimum wage. Also, there is a provision for equal pay for equal work, irrespective of the gender. India has ratified various relevant ILO conventions for providing decent works, including Convention number 111 regarding discrimination, employment and occupation convention, Convention number 11, right of association, agriculture convention 1921, Convention number 100, Equal Remuneration Convention, Convention number 138 and 182 on child labor, Convention 29 and 105 on forced labor, and Convention 81 on labor inspection system. And India fully adheres to the standards set in these conventions. India is determined to address the challenges which the aquaculture sector is facing, and India would continue its effort in promoting decent work in collaboration and in association with the workers group and with the employers group. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, sir. And I have a request from the government of Turkey. Government representative of Turkey, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, my chair. Dear participants, at the beginning of my speech, I greet you on behalf of my country, my ministry, and myself. First of all, I would like to thank everyone who contributed to successful realization of this organization. Dear participants, in order for aquaculture activities and investments in our country to continue within the framework of blue growth and sustainable aquaculture, activities for the protection, development, and regulation of aquaculture areas and the continuity of the studies related to these activities are very important in terms of sustainable aquaculture. In this context, aquaculture is one of the fastest growing sectors in the world. And in parallel with these developments, important developments have been achieved to increase aquaculture production through aquaculture with the policies implemented in line with the objectives of our ministry. And it continues to maintain its position as the leading country in its region. As you all know, as a result of countries closing their borders due to the coronavirus epidemic worldwide and also declaring curfews or restrictions, there has been a decrease in the exports of fishery production in our country, as in all countries, and the demand in the domestic market has gradually decreased. In this context, with the decisions taken by our ministry and the campaigns, fish producers by the aquaculture producers are offered for sale in chain markets and retail outlets participating in the campaign through producers associations. Aquaculture sector is one of the important sectors in Turkey's exports. In parallel with the developments in aquaculture production and processing technologies, a significant increase is observed in our aquaculture exports. Products obtained through aquaculture are sent to 80 countries, primarily European countries, among them countries such as Japan, USA, Russia, and Korea. It is exported as frozen, fresh, chilled, smoked, and filleted. With the increase in Turkish salmon production in our country, it has become one of our products that have been in high demand and exported in recent years. In addition, bluefin tuna is very valuable fish economically, and our country exports all of the product it produces to Russia, European Union country, and Arab countries, especially Japan. The amount of products obtained throughout aquaculture is 420,000 tons as of 2020. Most of this is sea bass, sea bream, trout, and Turkish salmon. One of the most important factors in the increase of our exports is the quality of the fish grown in our country. Our companies which are engaged in aquaculture in our country and our processing facilities are constantly inspected and certificated by many national and international quality management systems in order to produce quality and reliable products. In addition, we are a member of many international organizations operating in the world and our region, to which we contributed to works related to fisheries and food. These international organizations, FAO, GFCM, OECD, CITES, BISEC, Eurofish, CACFISH, and ICAT. We are aware that the investment made in this sector is made in our future, and we determine and implementing our policies accordingly. The important thing is not to produce a lot, but to make our productions sustainable. On behalf of my country, thank you all for listening to me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I have two more countries on my list now, and I would like to turn to the government representative of Tunisia. You have the floor.
Merci. شكرا سيد الرئيس، السادة نواب الرئيس، السادة ممثلي الحكومات والمنظمات الدولية. تعتبر الموارد السمكية من المصادر الأساسية التي يعتمد عليها بشكل متزايد في توريد غذاء بروتيني لمواجهة الزيادة المستمرة في احتياجات السكان في العالم، وهذا يتطلب اتباع استراتيجيات تقوم على مبدأ أساسي يعتمد على ضرورة الاستفادة الكاملة من مختلف الموارد الطبيعية المحلية، ويمثل استغلال المسطحات المائية للسدود في الإنتاج السمكي في الجمهورية التونسية أهمية بالغة في تحقيق التنمية الريفية حيث أن معظم هذه المسطحات تنتشر وتتوزع في مناطق داخلية بعيدة عن السواحل. إضافة إلى هذا، يمثل هذا النشاط محوراً أساسياً في تنمية قطاع الصيد البحري، وذلك نظراً للدور الذي يمكن أن يلعبه في توفير منتوج إضافي للمنتوج البحري التي تبقى إمكانيات تطوره محدودة مقارنة بالارتفاع المتواصل للطلبات على مستوى الاستهلاك. وفي إطار السياسة التنموية التي تستهدف تعبئة كافة الموارد الطبيعية المتاحة ببلادنا، تم العمل منذ بداية التسعينات على تطوير تربية الأحياء المائية الذي شهد أو في إطار السياسة التنموية التي تستهدف تعبئة كافة الموارد الطبيعية المتاحة ببلادنا، تم العمل منذ بداية التسعينات على تطوير تربية الأحياء المائية الذي شهد نقلة نوعية معتبرة خلال العشرية الأخيرة 2011-2020، حيث تضاعف الإنتاج 300% وبلغت معدل 16,181 طن. ومنذ سنة 2007 قامت الجمهورية التونسية بتأطير وتكوين خريجي التعليم العالي والتكوين المهني لتكون اليد العاملة مختصة وإسناد ومنذ سنة 2007 قامت الجمهورية التونسية بتأطير وتكوين خريجي التعليم العالي والتكوين المهني.
Excuse me, sir. Maybe if you would turn your camera off and only use the possibility of audio, we would not have so many disturbances for the interpreters. If we could go on like that, please, you have the floor again.
شكرا. ومنذ سنة 2007 قامت الجمهورية التونسية بتأطير وتكوين خريجي التعليم العالي والتكوين المهني لتكون اليد العاملة المختصة وإسنادهم رخص استغلال المسطحات المائية، وذلك لضمان استدامة تربية الأحياء المائية على نطاق صغير دون التمييز مما ساهم في الولوج إلى التمويلات والأسواق والمعلومات. وقامت الوزارة بتركيز المركز الفني لتربية الأحياء المائية، وذلك لمساندة الشبان المنتصبين في تربية الأحياء المائية وتكوين منظمة مهنية خاصة بتربية الأحياء المائية لتكون قوة اقتراح في معالجة الإشكاليات الفنية واستصدار القوانين والنصوص الترتيبية. وشكرا.
Tunisia, and I have a request for the floor from Vietnam. Government representative of Vietnam, you have the floor. Go ahead, please. that Vietnam is offline for some reason. Maybe they could come in again later, but there are no other governments that have requested the floor at this point. Government of Brazil has requested the floor. Government representative of Brazil, you have the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief just to say that I'd like to mention that Brazil has an extensive coastline and a large amount of fresh water. So there's a huge economic potential in fishing farming that can contribute to food security and must be carried out under the observance of the rules of decent work and health and safety conditions. We wish this meeting brings all of us a bigger understanding and better qualification for improve the aquaculture sector in our countries and communities. And I hope we can reach gender equality and better work conditions all over the world for the ones who will make a living off this growing sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that very brief and clear intervention. Do we have Vietnam online yet? We do not have them online yet. And any other governments? None have requested the floor. So at this point, I would like to ask if there are any official international organizations that would like to make general statements. Do we have a list of those? The floor, I'm told, by the Secretariat. And then finally, I would like to ask if there are any non-governmental international organizations who are attending the meeting or observers who would like to make general statements. Do we have any requests? AO has requested to take the floor. You have the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. On behalf of FAO, I would like to thank ILO for the invitation during this week at the technical meetings in aquaculture in the context of the rural economy. FAO will think that this is a very needed, important discussion, social dialogues with their constituents, and FAO is very pleased to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
For intervention, and I have a request for the floor for GSSI. You have the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, distinguished chair, distinguished delegates. The Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative, or GSSI, is pleased to attend this important meeting as an observer and would like to thank the ILO for this. I would like to make use of this opportunity to provide a brief reflection on the work of GSSI and share our reflections on the discussion points in the agenda of the meeting. GSSI is a public-private partnership working towards more sustainable seafood for everyone. We consist of over 90 organizations and represent the full seafood value chain, companies, NGOs, governments and international organizations, including the UN, FAO and UNIDO. GSSI successfully developed and operates a benchmark for seafood certification programs based on the FAO guidelines on aquaculture certification and the eco-labeling of marine and inland capture fisheries. The GSSI Global Benchmark Tool, launched at the 20th anniversary of the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries in Vigo in 2015, helps to create a level playing field for seafood certification and prevent unnecessary and harmful barriers to trade and increasing opportunities for market access for developing countries. The first trend that we observe in our work and conversations in our global partnership is that there is an increased recognition of the importance of social responsibility and decent work in the seafood industry. Responding to a need for more clarity on these topics, GSSI and the Sustainable Supply Chain Initiative from the Consumer Goods Forum launched a collaboration to develop a benchmark tool for seafood standards on fair labor practices. Leveraging the GSSI partnership and using the experience of successfully developing the GSSI Global Benchmark Tool, The collaboration led to the launch of a social SSCI benchmark in May 2021. Using the ILO conventions and principles as the core of the benchmark framework, the SSCI benchmark will help the sector to understand which social seafood certification programs are working towards achieving ILO's fair labor principles. Another key development in the sector is the trend of a more integrated approach to simultaneously address environmental and social responsibility challenges. GSSI's new Seafood Map program acknowledges this trend and is designed to bring a new approach for continuous improvement through effective sector collaboration. Ultimately, the program will become a globally inclusive digital platform that compiles and accelerates all fisheries and aquaculture efforts on the pathway to sustainability through a common reporting language anchored in the UN SDGs, hereby encouraging and scaling the needed collaborations to achieve both environmental sustainability as well as decent work for all. Finally, as a global partnership comprised of both private sector companies and public organizations, the GSSI regards efforts that strengthen public-private collaboration as an important opportunity to address the sector-wide challenges and promote decent work in the sector. Developing transparent tools and solutions that reduce sector fragmentation and enable sector-wide collaboration remains our key focus areas. Having built a partnership of more than 90 companies and organizations since our inception in 2013, we now aim to strengthen the collaborations built to date and increase the participation and recognition of smallholders in the global sustainability field. At the heart of this is the fact that all our work is based on internationally recognized criteria and frameworks, such as the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, and in the case of our social responsibility work, ILO conventions and principles. We work closely with other organizations, including various intergovernmental organizations, to identify actions that the GSSI partnership or individual companies within the partnership can take to accelerate the implementation of such international policy frameworks and guidelines, hereby maximizing the impact that the GSSI partnership can make. We welcome collaboration with the ILO and its members on this, and look forward to the outcomes of this important meeting on the future of work in aquaculture in the context of the rural economy. Thank you very much for inviting us again, and look forward to attending the sessions over the next few days. Thank you.
And thank you. Now I think we have exhausted the list of those wanting to take the floor. Actually, Vietnam had requested the floor earlier. Are they online now? They have not managed to come online. So we will go now directly and move to the discussion point 1. But before that, I would like to make a few announcements. A working party on conclusions will convene on Thursday, December 16th, to draw up a draft conclusions. These draft conclusions will be submitted to the meeting for the review and adoption on the last day. As per Article 13 of the Standing Orders, the working party on conclusions will consist of 4 members appointed by each of the groups and advisors. The working party will meet on Thursday, the 16th December at 2:30. And it is not open to, and it is a closed meeting. So there are no observability to the public. And I would request that the groups to hand in names of the 4 members for each group, as well as those advisors that will follow them, by Tuesday, 14th of December, no later than 11:30. So having given these few announcements, we move now to the first point of discussion. And I would begin by inviting Ms. Fortunai, Head of Unit of Forestry, Agriculture, Construction and Tourism Unit, to please introduce the first point for discussion. Ms. Fortuny, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And the first point for discussion, and I read, is as follows. What have been the challenges and opportunities for the promotion of decent work in the aquaculture sector, including the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and those relating to the 4 strategic objectives of the decent work agenda, international labor standards and fundamental principles and rights at work, employment, including productivity, recruitment, skills development, social protection, including social security, occupational safety and health, wages and other conditions of work, and tripartism and social dialogue. What have been the key drivers of trends and developments in the sector, in particular, the impact of the evolving megatrends, such as the demographic transition, globalization, technological advancement, and environmental and climate change? Thank you, Chair.
Hi, these are some big issues that we need to discuss. I wish we had a month, but we only have a very short period of time to discuss this. So we will now start the discussion, and we would go to the social partners first. If the vice chairpersons would like to pass the floor to members of the groups to make brief statements, please inform us beforehand. And please try to limit your group interventions to 5 minutes. Oh, excuse me, 7 minutes, as we have quite pressed for times, as I'm saying time and again. Following the social partners, I will give the floor to the governments. First to the government vice chair, of course. I request other governments who may wish to take the floor to raise their virtual hand from the toolbar function or comment in the chat box so that the Secretariat may take note of the request. Once we have exhausted our speakers list, we will return to the employers and workers and then to the government vice chair for some final comments. As I had been rolling the dice in my hand earlier, it came up again for Mr. Munte, so I would ask you to take the floor, Mr. Munte, Vice Chairperson of the Employers Group. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. As underlined in the employer's opening statement, we expect the discussion under this question to touch upon the immediate effects caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, but also focus on the longer impacts without overlooking those trends which were already shaping the agriculture these past years. On the immediate and visible pandemic impacts, each stage of the agriculture production has been either disrupted or stopped by measures arising from COVID-19 restriction. These restrictions have led to an estimated drop in the overall output of 1.3% in 2020, which marks a sharp departure from the consistent 4 to 5% rate of growth observed over the recent years, as well as being the first annual decline in production in almost 60 years. More concretely, fluctuations in demands are having clear impacts on the overall business continuity, especially in light of disrupted transportation system and increased transportation costs, more input and maintenance costs, and decreased market price of fish. The impacts of transportations are particularly acute in this sector as it operates in an increasingly globalized environment, illustrated by the sector's degree of openness and integration into international trade. These blockages are having snowball effects as unsold production result in increasing levels of live fish stocks, creating higher costs for feeding as well as risks of fish mortalities. Against that backdrop, it's clear that aquaculture businesses require targeted financial support to cope with the ongoing effects of the pandemic, but we'll come back to that later on the discussion tomorrow on the discussion point number 2. Turning to the challenges that the sector was already experiencing before the pandemic, there are numbers of them. These are often related to ecological sustainability, which is key for the future sustainability of the sector, but also relate to operating in rural areas. Indeed, biological and water quality parameters and access to fresh and marine water sources often result in companies having to operate in rural areas. This in turn can pose a number of challenges to the industry growth, such as hurdles to developing a vibrant aquaculture workforce, a declining rural population due to low birth rates, and out-migration, and increasing of coastal development and limited access to infrastructure, such as transportation and social infrastructures. The aquaculture industry is indeed particularly affected in developing economies by labor and skills shortages, which stems from a number of reasons. It appears that on top of having an aging population, some countries struggle to attract youth and new workers as they are necessarily aware of the industry and aware of the employment opportunities, even though these offer high working conditions. Linked with the rural nature of the aquaculture sector is the vast prevalence of informality. This is certainly one of the key challenges this sector is confronted with, especially in developing countries in the Asian and African region. Informality is the major cause of all the challenges the sector is currently experiencing, such as lack of labor administration, inspection, and compliance with national labor standards. Ultimately, informality is the main reason for the decent work deficit and the lack of productive employment in aquaculture. And this was also pointed to by both the government and the workers' spokesperson in their opening remarks. Another key challenge is the inadequate enabling environment in which business operate in more and more hampering the development of sustainable enterprises. The lack of high quality infrastructure is in many regional or remote areas, and the limited access to financial services is adversely affecting the industry competitiveness and productivity. And we want to insist on the challenges related to productivity as these are key to ensure aquaculture can meet future demand of fish products. Now that the industry has become more mature, productivity gains have started to decrease in many countries. This is because the main input factor in the past years have been to create new areas of production. In light of the competition aquaculture producers are now facing for access to water, creating new sites is no longer possible. Thus, productivity issues should be looked at from all angles, especially from the technological angle, to ensure the sector can continue to grow at a similar pace as demand. On the environmental challenge, these are of course crucial for the future viability of the sector. Without considering environmental challenges, the industry runs the risk to collapse under the effects of climate change. This is because aquaculture is inherently dependent on the environment in which they operate. The industry needs to respond to our environmental challenges by embracing new standards such as waste management and waste water treatment, protection of the natural ocean environment, etc. But these measures need to be well developed and be crafted in consultation with industry associations. Let me also focus on some other challenges, such as gender equality. While women account for about 50% of the workforce, the sectors tend to be dominated by men in the management, in the manager positions, leaving women in processing functions. The result is women having fewer opportunities and receiving smaller returns from aquaculture than men. Specific challenges also exist for attracting more women into some aquaculture positions. On child labor, while there is no global data on the prevalence and concentration of the child labor in aquaculture, we know that this is an acute issue in specific countries. This is a key challenge to decent work, and urgent action is needed to ensure we can meet the goal of ending child labor by 2025. Again, this specific challenge originates from the extent of informal operations. Efforts to tackle child labor must be conducted in parallel with actions to curb the spread of informality where decent work deficits are. Informal workers are indeed the most affected by external shocks because of the lack of adequate and sustainable social protection system. Having now mentioned the challenges, it's also important that we speak about the opportunities the sector is bringing about, notably in terms of growth, employment, and income. One immediate opportunity of the sector is the critical role it can play in post-pandemic recovery. If hotels, restaurants, and other food services manage to remain open and logistics blockages are resolved, we can expect that demand for aquaculture products to increase worldwide in the coming years. The sector is indeed considered as a future growth industry, and we should make sure we take full advantage of them. Aquaculture notably plays an important role in economic development throughout the world, including rural development. With some countries experiencing a boom in population, notably in Africa and Asia, aquaculture has the potential to offer this new workforce with quality employment opportunities, thus reducing youth unemployment. Furthermore, several surveys show that aquaculture workers highly value the possibility to work while staying close to the rural communities. Aquaculture therefore offers much needed and wanted employment opportunities, which promote social inclusion and income security. New technologies and new production processes are also major opportunity, as they have the potential to increase the efficiency and the environmental sustainability of production system, thus tackling some of the challenges we've seen earlier. Digitalization and other technological tools are also expanding new employment opportunities, lowering OSH risks, and increasing the quality of products. Another opportunity is the positive contribution the sector can make towards achieving the SDGs agenda by ensuring food security, nutrition, and sustainable livelihoods, among other goals. This is one of the key contributions of the sector, especially in light of growing population worldwide. As we have said, employers certainly recognize the challenges faced by the sector, but given the major opportunity it can generate, we think the outcome of this discussion should be positive about the current and future outlook of the aquaculture sector. Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry for being a couple of minutes too long.
Apologies accepted. Mr. Bragason, Vice Chairperson of the Workers' Group, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Dear Chair, dear delegates, as I said earlier, aquaculture is not a new sector, but it started to contribute significantly to the global food supply and rural livelihood about 30 years ago. Today, the sector contributes around 50% of the total seafood production. While the production of some species, such as salmon and shrimp, has come from intensive farming, much of this expansion has been due to the wide-scale adoption of aquaculture by small farmers and medium-sized enterprises. In the future, aquaculture will continue to grow, as it will play a central role in filling the gap between the increasing demand for seafood and what capture fisheries can provide, and it will provide more sustainable sources of protein for the world's growing population. However, growth needs to be understood and regulated in a careful way. Due to intensive farming sourcing practices, there are significant negative effects on the environment, natural habitats, and biodiversity. There are also serious environmental risks associated with intensive farming on non-native aquatic species. They are more prone to diseases and cause environmental damage while requiring more chemical inputs in their cultivation, creating threats to the biodiversity in many regions. Non-regulated expansion of intensive aquaculture undermines sustainability of farmers and rural economy as a whole. Many such cases were registered already in Asia Pacific and Latin America. Aquaculture is part of agriculture, and we observe a significant shift in land use, including coastal land and land located near rivers and lakes. The demand for land is increasing, but it's equally rapid growing sector in terms of water use. When seafood farming expands to the marine area, that raises the issues of water ownership rights, which are underdeveloped in most national jurisdictions. Aquaculture represents many risks, but also many new opportunities. For example, there is a potential for seaweed and algae farming to contribute to climate change mitigation through carbon sequestration. Dear Mr. Chair, looking at the rapid expansion of the aquaculture, we cannot, however, ignore the human dimension of this process. There is significant human rights abuses identified in agriculture in several of countries, including forced labor, trafficking, and child labor. These abuses are exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, and many other challenges have occurred during that period. But the truth is, most of these issues were already there before the pandemic. The drivers of child labor in aquaculture are similar to drivers of child labor in agriculture. This includes piece rates, wage systems, unfair prices for harvests, and the family debt accrued due to lack of access to rights to food and nutrition, health, housing, and education. The absence of access to social protection, especially in rural informal sector, is a major factor contributing to poverty, social inequalities, and the use of child and forced labor. Unfair schemes that increase dependency on rising cost of inputs, seeds, fry, and feed also contribute to the indebtedness and the vicious cycle of debt, poverty, and child labor. This is particularly acute under contract farming arrangements. Similarly, there are inadequate safeguards in the supply chain to ensure that fair price or even premium price paid by consumers translate into fair incomes for small and marginal farmers and farm workers. The vulnerability of workers, especially women and children, to trafficking and forced labor is increasing due to climate displacement and climate migration. Extreme weather events are destroying lives and livelihood, and this is particularly true for climate vulnerable coastal and marine areas. Dear Mr. Chair and delegates, aquaculture is inevitably associated with water, which creates very specific environment hazards and risks. And it's very important to focus on rights and working conditions in agriculture in terms of occupational health, safety, and the environment. The physical, mechanical, chemical, and biological hazards in agriculture are well documented. Of particular concern is the use of chemicals, including industrial detergents, as well as antibiotics in agriculture. The clear statistics for the occupational accidents in agriculture is not available, but we know that this work is highly risky, and these risks are intensified by the precarious nature of the work. In the post-harvest operation, for example, in the peeling sheds, the physical and ergonomic hazards are largely driven by piece rate wages and strict quotas combined with precarious employment. Normally, workers, even those working for big companies, have no contracts, hired on daily basis, and supposed to work at highest possible speed. The occupation safety approaches should relate to the changing nature of the work. Establishment of formal permanent employment combined with collective bargaining rights should be the key path to build safe and productive workplaces. Many of the workers in the sectors are female. Women remain invisible backbone in the aquaculture production, supporting local food security and ensuring that fish is grown, processed, and packaged for sale at regional and national markets. They are rarely chosen for leadership roles, meaning that they do not have voices in decisions related to working conditions and for fair competition. Systemic discrimination and lack of representation and recognition in the agriculture makes women more vulnerable to abuse. Sexual harassment and gender-based violence are hugely pervasive across many fishing communities. It is not rare that women are being forced to exchange sex for jobs or access to fish markets. Extensive inequalities also persist in the essential roles that women play in primarily fish processing. If a woman is able to find a job in this occupation, it's likely that the position will be temporary and unsalaried, meaning that the job is not as secure as she would not qualify for benefits of health insurance, childcare, or severance packages if she is let go. Additionally, post-harvest female fish workers are often exposed to dangerous conditions in sheds and plants with no ventilation, limited breaks, and crowded facilities, which has been especially harmful during the COVID-19 pandemic because working in close quarters increases the risk of virus transmission. Freedom of association remains an unreachable dream for most of the workers in the sector. In many countries, informal, temporary, and seasonal agriculture workers are unable to form or join a union due to the nature of their employment, anti-union action of some employers, or direct restriction imposed on migrant workers by governments. However, the history of the development in many countries shows that ensuring freedom of association is the key instrument in changing the situation to the better, since it empowers workers to do it themselves. Dear Chair, the environmental aspects of the agriculture sustainability was actively researched over the last decades at various levels. However, there is a significant gap in the analysis of the social and labor aspects of the agriculture sustainability. We should fill this gap. There are aquaculture practices that can be recognized as both socially and environmentally sustainable, and practices that are unsustainable, and there needs to be arrangements on the meaning of sustainable agriculture. Socially sustainable agriculture must ensure the protection of workers' rights, as well as establishing standards through which the economic contribution of agriculture to rural communities, through decent work, living wages, fair prices, food security, and increased public investments in public goods and services. Sustainability standards and social protections are all needed to build resilience in the face of seasonality and climate change, as well as reducing dependence of fragile global supply chains. We need agriculture which drives rural communities out of poverty, creates decent jobs, helps to develop public infrastructure and accessible social services. This sector has enormous potential for that, and we need to uncover this potential by addressing the employment and labor challenges in the sector. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Person. And now I turn to the government bench. Mr. Akkar, Vice Chairperson of the Government Group, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have not a government group statement on this point. Other governments may want to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And I have a request from the government of Turkey to take the floor. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to say something about the first discussed topic in our country. Due to the coronavirus epidemic worldwide, the export of fisheries from our country decreased by 60%. In addition, the demand in the domestic markets has gradually decreased due to the increase in water temperature in terms of production technique. It is not possible to keep the fish growing cages or pools for a long time. So it has been necessary to put them on the market. However, due to the gradual narrowing of export and consumption opportunities, it is predicted that a large amount of the harvested fish will remain in the hands of the products. And with these campaigns organized, fish produced by aquaculture producers were put up for sale in chain markets and retail outlets participating in the campaign through Producer Regional Association. Consumers were also provided access to fish through these sales outlets. And Around 1,000 tons of fish were sold during the campaign period. According to information received from large chain markets, despite some restriction on curfew due to the epidemic and people refraining from going out, it has been determined that our people even come to the markets just to buy fish. And in 22 and 20, internal consumption support for processed fishery products was implemented for our producers holding aquaculture certificate. And in addition, in this process, in order to prevent the producers from making losses and suffering, and to ensure the survival of the sector, in order to increase domestic consumption, the chain markets operating at the national level promotional activities such as discount campaigns, public service announcement, and TV programs in the written and visual media were carried out. And the other, there are, in my country, there are a lot of 52,000 direct workers in the aquaculture sector, 34,000 of whom are hunting, and 11,000 are 6,500 in aquaculture and processing facilities, 10% of them in aquaculture, and 60% in the processing industry are women. And the other, in recent years, in parallel with the technological developments in the world and in our country, significant developments have been experienced in aquaculture systems, and more modern and advanced technologies have been used in many countries. A technology above the world standards has begun to be applied in cage and feeding systems in aquaculture facilities in the seas and dams. The fisheries law 1380 and the fisheries breeding regulation enacted accordingly, and the aquaculture regulation Article 20A made it compulsory to make changes in the number of technical personnel employment specified in Article 10 of the Implementation Principles Circular. Thank you, Chair.
And do we have any, the floor is open for the governments to take the floor. Do we have any others? No other governments have requested to take the floor. So this is going quite quickly. And now we would have a second round of interventions from the groups, if they want to make brief comments to the statements that they have heard during these discussions. And I would start with Mr. Mumthe.
For giving me the floor once more. I promise to be brief this time. We do not have any difficulties with accepting that there are decent work deficits also in this sector. And the work Mr. Bragason has mentioned quite a few of them. However, in our view, the main problem and the root cause of this, that is the informality. That we have, of course, season work, and we have short-time work. Part of that is due to the situation for the raw materials. The flow can't be stable all over the year. So the informality, that is really that is the root cause, as I said, for these decent work deficits. And of course, the remoteness of many of the plants, that is also has to be taken into account, and that has been pointed to also by Mr. Bragason. And you have this underemployment as well. When it comes to child labor, that is that the research show that the child labor that is mainly a problem at national level. The global supply chains, that is not that frequented when it comes to the child labor problem. So that is shouldn't be that stressed that much when it comes to the aquaculture sector. And in general, it's mentioned many times, both in ILO documents and otherwise other places, that flexible and diverse forms of work that can also be a joint benefit from both the worker side and from the employer side. And many of the part-time workers, they do so. They are part-time workers because they want to do that themselves, and it also that can fit in with the needs and situation for the employers. When it comes to the M&Es, multinational enterprises, I understood Mr. Bragason in the way that he said that they do not always respect the international labor standards. In our view, that is not the case. The M&Es, they fully respect the labor standards. But I think it's also quite important to stress what is mentioned in the report as well, that in this sector, aquaculture sector, is the SMEs, they are the far more of them than on the M&Es. So we shouldn't put too much emphasis on the situation for the M&Es because there are not that many of them. And I think that is what I have for this, for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monte. And then I turn to Mr. Bragason for final comments on point 1. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. I just want to mention as well that we would like to ask one of our delegates, Andrew from Ghana, to give a brief intervention after my response later. In terms of what Henrik and the employers have mentioned here earlier, we fully agree that we need to find a way and a plan together to eliminate child labor, and as clearly kind of like expressed by the employers, this is something that we should be working on together, and we are happy to kind of like find ways to promote ways to eliminate child labor in aquaculture. This is an issue, as you said, in certain countries. It's not an issue everywhere, but this is something that we can definitely work on together. However, also I would also like to highlight some other points that the employers mentioned that we could clearly work on, and it has to do with gender equality and empowering women in the sector. This is something that we should definitely focus on. We also appreciate the commitments, the long-term commitment to find a way to truly make agricultural truly sustainable from the sustainable development goals of the UN. I mean, this is something that we should be striving for, find a way to find a sustainability that covers social, economical, and environmental aspects. In terms of informality, clearly this is something that is a major issue in many regions and many developing countries. But it's not only in developing countries. We've seen this in Europe, we see this everywhere in agriculture, in aquaculture. But it's not only the rural economy or the system itself, it's also the issue of the employment contracts that are being offered to so many workers in the sector. We see frequently really precarious and very insecure working contracts being provided to workers in agriculture, in aquaculture, in fisheries, and in many other primary sectors of our societies. This casuality that is happening is something that is creating more and more informal societies within our labor markets, and this is something that we should be worried about for the future. In terms of the different labor standards, we believe and understand that many of those labor standards have been adopted and ratified in various countries, and many countries are making efforts to take steps to address some of those challenges that are already in the sector, and as was highlighted in the report. But it would be interesting to hear from the employers about concrete examples from the sector, or especially maybe from the multinational companies themselves, how they work on implementing some of those labor standards in their own work, and how they would like to see those labor standards being kind of like followed throughout their whole supply and value chain in general. With that said, I thank the chair for the word.
Thank you, Mr. Brason. You indicated that your colleague from Ghana would like to make a short intervention. You have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Brother Chairman and the Vice Chairman. In fact, I would just need to do some reflection on the COVID and its impact in the sector. We just have information that with the growing pandemic, child labor has increased. And I will justify that in my discussions. And then, Brother Chairman, the growth is not just at the formal, but is also grossly in the informal sector in fishing. During the pandemic, we predicted that especially within the informal economy, girls and boys needed attention because schools have locked down and they are home. Their parents are farming, so they were left to themselves. And we predicted they needed attention and started working towards it. No wonder by the time the conditions were relaxed, more girls moved from the pandemic. Instead of going to school, they went to maternity homes. What does it mean? They became pregnant during the pandemic, and they are still in the maternity homes because they have not given birth, and we need to follow them up and give them another opportunity. A lot of boys also, because they were living at home, took up lifestyles and then other types of jobs to survive. And after the pandemic, I wouldn't say after, but when they were relaxed, those boys, the schools are open now, and they are now hard to reach. They are not in the classrooms. They are still out there. And these children, Brother Chairman, we think need urgent attention, and they must be followed. During the lockdown, understandably, in the tropo farms and the West Africa farms where fishing is done, we see the employers have bought fingerlings. So during the lockdown, when the restaurants and the hotels were closed, the fingerlings were there, they needed to feed, and they invested so much in them, which we understood employers in that regard. But then at that time, because they were not making incomes, workers needed to go home. So there was some collaboration to ensure that incomes went low, actually. Some workers went home, actually. But then we saved the situation by rotating work. Workers said that during that period, they would not take wage increases for zero. Workers said that they would not work for the full month. They started working 2 weeks, so that people can get some other incomes, and then people can also stay in the job. Workers accepted cuts. And then, so what I'm trying to say is that during the pandemic, there was so much effect and the increase in child labor, and then workers' rights because of income were sacrificed and compromised. The children are still there. They are hard to reach, and we need to follow up on them. When it comes to Lake Volta, Lake Victoria in East Africa, Lake Volta in Ghana, and the rest, when you're talking about the figures, Brother Chairman, as compared to other forms of child labor in other sectors, are on the increase on the lake, and we needed to do something on that. In conclusion, I want to thank you very much, and I want to say that we as workers on the ground are developing models to address child labor and promote decent work. One of them is the TOCO model and some other models that we need to probably working with employers. We need to work together to ensure. Like the employers rightly said, in 2025, all children must be in school and all adults must be in a decent labor. And we can work towards it. If we invest more resources, we tackle the problem head on, and we accelerate our efforts working together with employers. Brother Chairman, I salute you.
Thank you. That was ending in a very positive way. We need to work together, and we of course would all join hands in erecting child labor from the labor market. All of us need to join hands in that. But now I turn to the government bench for final remarks. Mr. Akkar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The government group doesn't have any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Akkar. Are there any governments that have requested to take the floor now? None. No governments have requested to take the floor on these during these last minutes. We have 25 minutes left, so we will, of course, go directly into point 2 of the discussions.
Group would like to ask for a recession because we are not ready to kind of go into point 2.
The same goes for the employees. We were not able to discuss that within our group before this meeting. So we have only discussed point number 1. So the 2 and 3 we have to do tomorrow. I hope you agree. Thank you.
I had the indication that we would go into point 2 during this discussion. So I'm a little bit surprised if you are not prepared for it. But Mr. Akkar, you asked for the floor.
Yeah, the same for the government group. We were not able today morning to discuss at point 2.
Okay, now I'm overwhelmed and overpowered by the 3 parties in the group. So even if I would like to keep you here for 25 more minutes, I would not be able to do so. But let me remind you then that we start tomorrow on the discussion on point 2. And when we do that, I really would like that you would prepare to have your statements limited to the 7 minutes that we negotiated, and even shorter if possible, because then we would have more pressure tomorrow since we cannot start on point 2. And this is easily done by just rehearsing a little bit the inputs that you have, and that we make clear that we finish them on those 7 minutes. But before the closing of the meeting, I would like to give the coordinator an opportunity to address. Mr. Taher, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is for those participants, for the paid delegates. We have sent you an email regarding your reimbursement. Please do respond to it when you have the opportunity. As for tomorrow, as mentioned, your group meetings will start at 11:50. Please do let us know before the plenary of the nominated working party members so the chair can read them out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Taher. So this is actually the end of the session for today. I see you all fresh. When we start tomorrow, we have 3 hours tomorrow from 2:30. I hope your groups will be doing an efficient work during that time. And I see you all tomorrow at 2:30. Meeting is adjourned. Oh, can I bang the gavel? Yes. Ooh, now I have banged the gavel. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.